In case you haven't heard, stories in the gospel are not static newspaper articles to be read simply for information. The Gospels describe the experiences of living people encountering the living Jesus, both in times past and encounters which continue even today in your life and mine. The Gospels, though they're called books, are actually training manuals for looking for God's presence and miracles in our daily life and recognizing it. Today's Gospel from John is an account of two miracles of Jesus. First, the feeding of the 5,000 people with a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread. And then later, Jesus on the Sea of Galilee with his disciples, and he walks on water. The Gospel account of these miracles tells us first that in God's kingdom, everybody is fed. Nobody is hungry. And secondly, that God's love pervades the whole of creation. And part of our call as Christians is to love and care for the created order. So what is the gospel miracle? First of all, miracles in the gospel are not magic. That is, it's not Jesus doing the equivalent of pulling a rabbit out of a hat. But rather, the miracles in the Gospels are a sign of God's active presence in life, in your life, in my life, and the life of the world. Second, the miracles in the Gospels are signs of God's loving actions in human life, but actions slowed down enough for us in our dim sight to catch a glimpse of the fullness of life and the dynamism of life in God's kingdom. Since the Gospels are manuals for Christian living and acting, it's not a large leap to understand that Christians, you and I, are also called to be miracle workers, living out the Gospels in our own life. The feeding of the 5,000 calls us to work the miracle of feeding the hungry in this world, and therefore living out the reality that there is no hunger in God's kingdom, and standing as witness to that. Feeding the hungry is a gospel miracle lived out in a small way by our actions. Our mission as Christians is to live out and display the miracles in the Gospels in our own life and in our own actions. Now, the Gospels also point to God's empathy for a broken and lost humanity, and for you and for me. God took on our skin and walked in our shoes in the person of Jesus. Our call as Christians is to demonstrate in our own actions the same empathy that Jesus shows in the Gospels. The Gospel training manuals for Christians call us directly to care for others as we care for ourselves. How do we show divine empathy and produce our own miracles in the now of today's life? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here, using our present experience in the pandemic as an example. You can do one miraculous thing this very day in your own actions. In the midst of the pandemic, today's miracle is to offer yourself to receive a COVID vaccination. Taking this simple step points to several foundational Christian beliefs. First, it points to God's healing presence in our lives and to God's good intentions for all people. Getting vaccinated demonstrates God's call to love of self, which is a virtue, Receiving the COVID vaccine demonstrates God's call to love of others and to care for them and act in caring ways for them. Sadly, our state and national vaccination rates are lagging, and COVID infection rates are rising with the appearance of a more dangerous Delta variation. But behind these dry numbers are actual, living, flesh and blood, real people like you and me, and it is us with families and friends. We receive the vaccination out of care for others and care for ourselves, and just as God cares for us. People give so many reasons for not receiving the vaccination, most of them silly, I believe. In my view, unless one has a medical condition that does not permit vaccination, or the faith community one belongs to specifically prohibits it, not to receive vaccination is a selfish and an uncaring act. To refuse vaccination is a sinful way of showing a lack of care for yourself, a lack of care for those around you, and a refusal to be empathetic, to walk in the shoes of others in the way Jesus walked in our shoes. To refuse vaccination, if there is no reason not to, is self-centered and selfish at the expense of those we are called to love, yourself included. To be vaccinated is a small miracle in human life that shows confidence in God's presence in our lives and demonstrates to those around us that one way we express care for one another is by being vaccinated. You and I, as followers of Jesus, are called to be leaders and miracle workers, to demonstrate God's love at work in our lives by being vaccinated. So if you haven't been vaccinated, now's the time to go forth and do your own miracle.